Hi, have you ever felt you're not making any progress in your language learning, that you're stuck in a rut and you're just not making as much progress as you used to? Well, I'm going to teach you how to overcome this language learning plateau and start making progress again. This is Susan Broder from Speak Languages and Travel the World, here to help you improve your English with minimum effort and maximum benefit. So, what is the language learning plateau? When you start learning a language, your learning curve goes up very steeply because you don't know anything, and anything you learn builds up onto the next step. So, you're going up really quickly, and it seems like you're climbing a staircase. You go up every step quite fast. There comes a time when you seem to reach the end of a step and you can't jump up to the next level. However much you learn, you keep hitting against this step and you just feel you're not making any progress. Well, this is the language learning plateau, and unfortunately it's very demotivating, but people should persist and never give up, because if you carry on and carry on and carry on, when you feel at your lowest, all of a sudden, for no reason that you can't just understand why, suddenly you'll find you've gone up to the next step and can carry on progressing. Now, this is very individual. Some people have quite a few steps they hit against, others have fewer. Some people have them quite early on in their learning and some people later. But the average language learning plateau comes at the intermediate level. And what you have to understand is that you should never give up, because somehow it's as if your brain needed to digest the information. So you've got it there, it takes time, you have to leave it to sediment, and when your body feels it's elaborated it enough, then suddenly you'll step up to the next level. But it's something that you don't really control. The only thing you can do is to find ways of never giving up. And that's what I'd like to teach you, how to get out of this rut and progress to the next level. So, how do you get out of this rut and progress on your language learning journey? You need to, first of all, vary your methods. And enjoyment is the principal ingredient to progressing in your language learning. If you're not having fun, then there's no point in doing it. So you really need to enjoy it and you need to challenge yourself, but at the same time you mustn't challenge yourself with goals which are unrealistic. You must set realistic goals. Now, what methods can you use? I would suggest reading, listening to audiobooks, watching films, listening to music, listening to podcasts, reading magazines, blogs. Anything that interests you, anything you find exciting, that's the most important thing for making progress. Now, of course, at a certain level, to make significant progress, you also have to structure it slightly. So, for example, if you're reading a book and it's an audiobook, by the way, I will give you links to various sources that are usually free that you can use to improve your various skills. That's down in the description below. So, for example, if you're reading a book, find an audiobook. First of all, listen and read at the same time. It's better to do it in short bursts, so maybe dedicate time to a few pages. Make notes of any expressions that you find interesting and useful for you. And then, maybe the next day, reread it again listening. Then maybe on the following day, just listen to it. And on the following day, read it out loud. So you're practicing your reading and pronunciation. What is also very good sometimes is to, when you're listening, stop the actual audio and pronounce it the way you've heard it, so with the same intonation. practicing not only the words, but also the music, the melody of the language. So you get it all right, and you're practicing your reading, your listening, and your speaking skills. So I definitely recommend this also for lyrics, for podcasts, for anything where you can practice various skills together. It's better to do short bits, but at the same time, short bits not too often, because then it gets boring, and as we said, you have to enjoy what you're doing, and it mustn't get boring. So that's very, very important to enjoy what you're doing. Something I can't stress enough is not only to note down vocabulary, but also language expressions, so chunks. And when you make a note of these chunks, start using them as well. So look at your notes, write them down in some spaced repetition apps such as Anki, Quizlet, or something like that, or review your notes regularly, because it's the short but regular repetition which makes the difference. And try and learn the chunks, which will make life so much easier if you're using a whole chunk of language rather than trying to put words together yourself, which will probably end up making more mistakes. That comes to the start using the language more. So, okay, you've been reading, you've been practicing, but you actually have to learn to speak. And the only way you can learn to speak is to actually use the language. But use the language with the new words and chunks that you've been noting down, because that's what takes you to the subsequent level. Therefore, it's very important to use native generated materials. If you use materials which are written by natives, you'll be sure that they are correct materials that you can learn from. What's important is now the quality of the materials you're using rather than the quantity. It's not so much adding on learning time as choosing the right materials to learn from. Quality over quantity. This is particularly important if you want to use the language also for your job. I'm not a native speaker of German, and when I make phone calls and they bring up subjects I'm less proficient in, then I make a note of the expressions they use, because I may need to use these expressions in subsequent conversations. Therefore, I find it really handy as people are talking to note down words and expressions they use so that I can reuse them. And that's something which will also help you very much, especially in your job. Therefore, I do recommend making a note of what other people say to improve your language learning. Something very important to make the next step is to set yourself new goals, but they have to be realistic, so not too hard, but they have to also be challenging. However, you have to understand what your goals are, because some people may be quite happy with an intermediate level of language, whilst others may aim much higher. So it really depends on what you want, what will help you enjoy your communicative skills. For example, my grandmother was of Hungarian origin, but she moved to England in her 30s, I think. And she lived in England for the rest of her life. She died at the age of 83. And very often I would visit her and leave her a thank you note written the way she spoke. And very often I'd write, "Thank you for this wonderful holiday." And so this was Z-I-S instead of this. And she would pick up the phone and angrily say, "It's not true, I don't speak like that." But it was true, that's how she spoke. But she communicated brilliantly, everybody understood her, and she was happy with that. However, if you aim at a higher level, obviously you have to practice on your weaknesses. You have to look for your weaknesses and then improve on them. So in her case, it would have been the pronunciation of the, of were, and so on. This being said, you must understand that even native speakers make mistakes. And also fluency. What is the definition of fluency? I've lived in various countries, and I grew up bilingual English and Italian, and I realized that I'm not fluent equivalently in all my various languages, depending on where I got experience. So, for example, despite having grown up in Great Britain, I spent my summer holidays in Italy, and that's where I got my experience speaking about fish. Therefore, I'm not very proficient in English talking about the different kinds of fish, whilst I am in Italian, because that's where I got my experience. There again, I studied archaeology in Germany, and all my art history language is more proficient in German than in my two native languages, because that's where I got the experience. So the important thing is to realize that language learning is a never-ending process, and you must set yourself realistic goals, but also understand that you can never be equally fluent in all the languages you're learning, and be happy with that. Be happy with the various fluencies that you reach, and if you want to reach various fluencies in other languages, you'll have to dedicate time to that. One way to get rid of the frustration of this language learning plateau is to record your progress, which is actually not that easy. But for example, recording your speaking is one of the ways. You can record something you talk about, and then a month later record it again, and another month later again, and then make comparisons. The same can go for your writing about a topic. Or you could pick up a book, read it, and then maybe a year later pick up the same book and try rereading the first chapter and seeing if it flows more easily, if you understand it better. So these are various ways of comparing yourself and seeing if you actually have made progress, apart from the various progress tests that one can take. But that's a little more artificial, I find. It's very important to remember you as a language learner need to encourage people to correct you. Many people are shy and are happy that you're speaking their language in the first place and may not have the courage to correct you. So continuous correction can be frustrating, but you do learn when people correct you. I do remember two very funny episodes of my life. One in particular, when I was a child, my parents, who spoke Italian but also Trieste dialect, had mixed them sometimes, and I went into a clothes shop, and asked for a pair of trousers in dialect, but I was speaking Italian. And so the shop assistant laughed and said, "No, you can't say that in Italian, you have to say this other word." And so I learned it. I mean, for all my life until then, I had used the wrong word, and I was very happy that they corrected me. The same went for when I was learning German. I was going to an international school, so my learning was in English, but in the evenings I would go to various sports clubs, and I remember a skater who had corrected my German because I was continuously using the wrong adjective to say this is difficult. And after various corrections, I picked it up. So being corrected is fundamental, or you won't make progress. Now, your attitude to learning is also fundamental. You need to find what works for you and work at it regularly, but varying your study methods to keep it enjoyable and interesting. So, of course, you can't expect to improve and overcome the language learning plateau if you just occasionally practice your languages. You must be consequent about it, choose your own way, but keep at it, never give up, because if you give up, you'll never make it to the next step. The University of Münster in Germany has also recently discovered that if you alternate Short bursts of intense exercise with language learning, or actually learning of any kind, it will improve your learning by about 20%. They actually tested it, and people who were sedentary or who did, for example, a slow 40-minute jog did not show any improvement in learning anything else, whilst those who went for a 3-minute sprint, then took a 3-minute break, then another high-energy 3-minute sprint, and then sat down to learn vocabulary, for example, retained 20% more. Therefore, I recommend alternating short, intense exercise with your learning. Okay, so now let's summarize. First of all, you have to get out of your comfort zone, otherwise you'll never improve. Second, challenge yourself, but not too hard. Third, vary your language learning methods to keep it enjoyable. Fourth, enjoy what you're doing. Fifth, start using your language more. 6, use only native generated materials so that you're sure that you're learning new things. 7, note down expressions that natives use that can be useful to you. 8, constantly revise and use what you want to learn. 9, set new realistic short-term goals. 10, remember natives are not perfect either. 11, focus on your weaknesses. 12, encourage people to correct you. 13, attitude. Find what works for you and keep at it. 14, remember to alternate short bursts of intense exercise with your learning. 15, never give up. And if you follow all these tips, I'm sure you'll definitely overcome the language learning plateau. Look forward to hearing from you in the comments below if you have any other ideas, and also if you find you've gone up to the next level. Okay, and I hope this was useful, and don't forget to subscribe. Bye!